Hi guys, welcome to the Break the Chain podcast. I'm here today with Michael Hempseed. Michael is the author of Being a True Hero, Understanding and Preventing Suicide in the Community. He has an honours degree in psychology. He's a public and TEDx speaker. He's a radio show host, and he's the founder of Employee Solution Services, which is a company that helps prevent suicide in the workplace. So, Michael's well established in the world of suicide prevention, and thank you for coming on the show today, Michael.
It's fantastic to be here. It's such an important topic.
Absolutely. It's something that's really close to my heart because I've lost double figures friends to suicide so far, and it doesn't appear to be getting any better. And, as I learn more about this, especially locally, I know Whangamata is a area that I'm kind of visit a lot. And they had 5 in just over the winter, not too long ago. And it's kind of like has that cluster effect that you talk about in your book. I can't wait to kind of get stuck into the book. I've got loads of notes to talk about. But I'm just curious, how did you end up working in this field?
Somewhat accidentally. At school, I always wanted to be a film director. And then I always had people that came to me with their problems. I didn't ask for this, but people would always come and tell me what was going on for them, and I always say this field chose me, even though I didn't ask for it. I'm very happy to be doing this sort of work. Then particularly speaking about suicide, I think 5 years ago, I just ran 3 open community workshops on this. I wasn't sure anyone was going to show up. Then I think they were all booked out, and then within a year I had 17 requests, and then now I give somewhere between 150 to 200 talks on this per year.
Wow, that's a lot.
Just the odd one here and there.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I guess talking about that in public, I think that it's very brave because, when someone has been affected by this, they're extremely sensitive, and you can potentially get some extremely adverse reactions from people in the public. But have you found that you've had positive responses from people?
Yeah, it's interesting if I talk to people afterwards and ask, what did you think this was going to be like? And many people said, I thought this was going to be one of the worst talks I'd ever hear. I thought I'd be so depressed. I thought this would be so emotionally draining. And then when they leave my seminars, they often say they felt very uplifted. And I'm always very careful to present the research in a way that is uplifting, because you never know who is in the audience. I'm always conscious that people either come to my workshops, usually because they've either got personal experience of this, or they know someone close to them, or this has had a huge effect on them. So I'm always very conscious of that. And sometimes when I tell people what I do for a job, they say, you must have the worst job in the world. They think, this is a terribly depressing field. There are some absolutely tragic moments, and I don't want to diminish that, but it's also a surprisingly hopeful field, because there's a huge number of people out there that have felt suicidal, felt there was no reason to live, thought that nothing could ever get any better. And then I talk to these people and I find actually, despite all the odds, the overwhelming majority of people that feel suicidal can actually feel better. So it is a joyful field, and I always try and present the material in a way that does show that hope.
Absolutely. And I found that something that surprised me as well, is that I've been someone who hasn't had really any joy in my life since I was a kid. So partly because I was a drug addict, that definitely took the joy away for quite a while. Yeah. But I didn't get the joy back until I started doing the same thing, which is kind of seemed like a little bit of an irony. But yeah, it's an amazing field to work in. And yeah, I'm really grateful that you've come on the show today, because the way that you presented the book, as you've said, is talking about suicide is something that's really difficult to do. But in the book, you've done it in a way where it's not actually so much focused on suicide. It's focused on the prevention and not letting it get up to that point. How would you describe the essence of the book?
Yeah. So the book that I wrote is called Being a True Hero, Understanding and Preventing Suicide in Your Community. And like you said, I didn't really want to focus on suicide in and of itself. I really wanted to try and help anyone in the community understand the factors that are involved in suicide and to know what active and practical steps they can take to help someone. Now, sometimes this can be fairly easy. Sometimes there's things like loneliness, for example, can be a big factor in suicide. And, loneliness is something that we can all help people with. Unfortunately, I think one of the biggest groups that experience loneliness are people in rest homes. That is something that we could all do. We could go and say to the rest home, do you have any people that are lonely there that just want some visitors? So there's many things that everyone can do. You don't necessarily need specialist training for. And then certainly in the book, I do cover when more help is needed. So, for example, if someone experiences psychosis, where they have delusional thoughts, that's something that you need an expert medical professional for. So I try and help people recognize what they can do themselves, and then if someone does need more help, know how to refer to an expert.
Yeah. One of the things that actually shocked me and scared me about the book was that the majority of suicides happen fast and aren't necessarily thought about or planned. That was actually quite a shocking thing to hear. But there's a lot of hopeful messages, and I think one of the points that you mentioned about suicide happening fast is it's not actually in that case that you need to do something about that at the time. It's that we need to take actions before that prevent people from getting to that place. And the mindset that people have can be extremely dangerous. I know you mentioned the girl that wanted to go to the Olympics. Was that?
Yeah, if I just go back a step, I'll just explain just a little bit about same-day crisis suicide. So I think most people have this idea that suicide only occurs after a long history of depression. And what some of the recent research suggests is that somewhere between a third to a half of all suicides are the result of a same-day crisis. So the person was fine in the morning and then something goes wrong in their life. This could be something like a relationship breakup, getting fired from a job, a humiliation on social media. A fictional example of this that many people know of is the film It's a Wonderful Life. And in that film, there's a person that owns a bank and he loses a huge amount of money. And he was fine in the morning, and then suddenly when he loses that amount of money, he thinks about suicide. The story that you mentioned, that was a real life story. I was working as a youth worker a few years ago, and someone came to see me. She had this goal of being an Olympic athlete. She wanted to win a gold medal for New Zealand. She had spent her whole life from when she was a very young girl to practicing, always devoting almost everything she had to trying to get really, really good at swimming. And then the day before she came to see me, she got a rejection letter in the mail saying that she wasn't going to the Olympics. And this caught her totally off guard because she thought she was going to hopefully win a medal. And then suddenly to be told that this thing that you've spent your whole life working towards has now gone up in smoke. She was just so overwhelmed by this, she tried to end her life. Now, fortunately, she survived that attempt, and she knew 24 hours later that would have been a terrible mistake. But it shows in the heat of the moment, sometimes people make bad decisions. I think we'll talk about this a little bit later more, but one of the things I talk about in the book is the importance of good sleep. And we know that when people have poor sleep, they tend to be more impulsive. So one of the ways that we can tackle some of these instant suicides is by helping people to get better sleep.
Yeah, definitely. I know that that's something. I mean, there's all these factors, and you've spoke about so many factors, and I can just think in my life, you've mentioned finance and sleep, and they're two areas which I think are almost some of my most vulnerable areas, because finance is when as soon as it gets to the point where you're like in trouble with money, and it's like actually like everything changes and you just feel this weight upon you and you kind of feel like you're drowning. Same with when I get sleep. The way I am in the world when I'm tired is not good. So it's something I really, really try and prioritize is that I do get an acceptable amount of sleep. kind of 7 hours is the minimum. I can get 6.5 before I start getting really kind of not cool. Yeah.
And just on that, in terms of money, I had a young man ring me one day, and he said he owed Vodafone, I think it was $4,000. And to him, that was, like $1 million. He just thought there was no way I'm ever going to be able to pay this off. And he said, look, I'm going to be in debt for the rest of my life. I can't pay this off. I want to kill myself. And I said to him, well, worst case scenario, do you know you can be declared legally bankrupt? And he didn't know what that was. But when I explained worst case scenario, the debt could be wiped. Now, obviously, there's some a cost associated with that in terms of finances later on. But when he realised that actually there was a way out that didn't involve suicide, that took away his suicidal thoughts. So I think very rarely do we talk about money and suicide prevention, but to be in debt can be really difficult for people. It can start to weigh on you. There's lots of good budgeting services around. In New Zealand, there's a great website called Money Talks that's got a list of all the budgeting services around the country. So sometimes we think, oh, well, suicide's not something I can deal with. It's just too complicated. I'm just an ordinary person. Maybe on your Facebook page, you could say, if anyone ever has any money problems, there's this great organization called Money Talks. Sometimes there can be really simple and practical things like that we can all do that could potentially help someone.
Yeah, on our platform that we're putting together, finance and business is going to be a part of it, because I know that that's just such an important thing. I really don't underestimate the the severity and the weight that finance and business struggles have on people.
Can I just add a story in there?
Yeah.
There's a story of someone that owned a business. Unfortunately, that business didn't do too well. The man went bankrupt, and he was left with a debt, and it took him 17 years to pay this off. Now, if you think back to where you were in 2004, that is a long, long time to be burdened with a debt. Many people think, well, there's no hope after that. You can't go on to recover. You might have heard of this man. His name is Abraham Lincoln. He's one of the greatest presidents of the United States, and he played a major role in ending slavery. Now, when we talk about the amazing things that Lincoln did, why do we leave out the fact that he had a significant business failure and he was in debt for so long? When we write that out of history, I think we're doing a disservice to these people. Some people say, well, if we take this out, doesn't that make them greater? But I say by putting in their faults and failings, that actually makes them greater because they overcame such adversity. And maybe if someone thinks, I'm in a lot of debts, suicide's a good way out, maybe if they heard that Abraham Lincoln could overcome so much debt and go on to be incredibly successful, maybe that would help them to reconsider suicide.
Yeah, definitely. It makes me think of, if you type inspiring movies into Google,
yeah,
the list of movies that comes up are all, without exception, about people overcoming, struggles, like serious struggles. One of those movies is Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And it is the most, and if you are struggling, do that. Type inspiring movies into Google, because the list that comes up is absolutely incredible. And they're all about real heroic people, in my opinion. None of them are about people achieving, trivial material success. And there's maybe some, but through great struggle. And it's not the success, it's the overcoming the struggle that is the thing that inspires people, isn't it?
It is. And so I think one of the simple things that all of us can do around suicide prevention is to put some more of these stories out there. Another one who became severely suicidal was Colonel Sanders, who founded KFC. And I think he got to the age of 60. And many people think, well, if you haven't made it by age 60, your life's pretty much over. You need to be young. I understand that he either was almost or completely bankrupt at age 60, and yet after that he went on to found KFC and become very successful. So I think we need to tell people about more of these stories.
Definitely, and I think that what we're valuing now is really, really problematic. Just to go back slightly to that story, and something that I think is actually at the very heart of this problem is, and you mentioned it in the book, is making, well, it depends what you have as the foundation of your life. And if you wrap up all of your security in one thing, which is, whether it's going to the Olympics or being the best boxer or getting a specific girl, or, whether it's one of these things, or if you get in a relationship and you put all of your security in one person and then they want to leave, or something happens, or if it's in finance, or no matter what it is. But if you put all of your security in one thing that is temporary and changeable, you put yourself in such a vulnerable position, don't you?
Because if you lose that one thing, you've lost a lot. Whereas, maybe if you have a relationship, maybe if you have, a goal like going to the Olympics, if you have strong family and friends, well, then if you lose one of those things, it's not an absolute disaster.
Yeah. And I guess everybody sees the purpose of their life differently. And I think most people haven't really actually considered what the purpose of their life is and how vulnerable what they are valuing makes them. I know a lot of, like in the case of boxers, I know a lot of boxers, and as soon as their career's over, they just, you turn to drugs and alcohol and just start to destroy yourself, because that was the one thing that you wanted to do. And when that one thing's gone, it makes you vulnerable. I've been in that position myself. And I think through actually having a purpose in life, like being able to help people and not actually limiting yourself to one thing, but in whatever way you can, gives you a much broader foundation, doesn't it?
It does, and there's all sorts of amazing studies about the power of volunteering. And one study found that elderly people who volunteered for up to 2 hours a week, they had a 63% less chance of dying.
Wow.
So, that's pretty incredible. So I think, sometimes we define ourselves by this one thing. And one of the things we've learned in the pandemic is everything can change. Like last year, for example, I thought I had lots of good business lined up. I thought I had the year pretty much sorted. And then the day the lockdown was announced, I lost 94% of my planned business for the following year.
Oh my God.
So, I got most of it back eventually, but, fortunately I've got other things that matter in my life. There's been some work around resilience, and a lot of people that are resilient expect problems in life. So they don't expect life to always be easy. They actually expect problems. And when you expect problems and something like this comes up, you think, oh, well, this is part of life. This is fairly normal. How do I get through this?
Yeah, it's such a enormous part of rehabilitation, that acceptance of change. I know in the 12 steps, it kind of hinges around the serenity prayer, knowing what you can and knowing what you can change. I can't actually remember it, but it's
it's something like God, give me the wisdom to know the things I can change and the things I
can have a
can't.
crack at it. I think I've got it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change, with courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it's more fundamentally accepting that things not might change, but will change and do change, and then being prepared to take on the challenges as they change in front of you, and not because I think we're delusional if we think that things aren't going to change, and then we're in such shock when they do that we don't know what to do with ourselves, rather than. It kind of seems pessimistic to think that things are going to go wrong at some point, but it actually prepares you for when they do.
Yeah. And I do worry about some of the things a lot of young people are told, such as, if you want to be an All Black, you can be an All Black. The problem is each year there's 30 people that can be All Blacks. I don't know, there's probably 300,000 young men in New Zealand that want to be an All Black. Statistically, your odds of actually achieving that are incredibly low. And then the average working career of a professional rugby player in New Zealand is 12 to 18 months. So, it's not being pessimistic. It's been quite realistic about some of this.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, but it's like, the message that's out there is abandon duty and chase your desires. Do what you want to do, and forget, regardless of whether you have responsibilities and duty to family and society. It's like, forget about that. If you dream it, you can be it. It's a very selfish worldview, which is, I think, kind of not doing us any favours. you spoke in the book about how depression isn't kind of actually necessarily one of the biggest factors, especially due to that, the crisis suicides and stuff. But it is a large factor, isn't it? What is depression from a medical perspective?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify. So there's, first of all, having a bad day. So, maybe, we don't get the result we want in the test. Maybe our boss tells us we haven't done very well on the job. And a lot of us feel pretty flat. Maybe some of us even cry. Some of us feel pretty down on days like that. And we need to be really clear that is a normal part of life. So, unfortunately, life is filled with problems. That is not the illness depression. When it becomes the illness depression, it really starts to affect your functioning. So things like when you can't eat, when you can't sleep, thoughts of not wanting to be alive, not being able to concentrate, all these things actually become an illness. And the way I define this is, if all of us go for a run around the block, we'd get out of breath. That's normal, that's a part of life. But if we couldn't get our breath back, we could be having an asthma attack or a heart attack. And really with depression, we all have bad days, but some people, unfortunately, those bad days go on, and there's little reprieve from that. We found that depression is not an imaginary illness. There is a part of the brain called the hippocampus. This is one of the parts of the brain we use for memory and emotion. And researchers have found that if this part of the brain, if someone develops depression, this part of the brain can shrink by up to 17%. So there are very real and very significant changes that happen when someone develops depression. So this is not an imaginary illness. This is very real.
Yeah. Do you think people are throwing words like depression, anxiety, various other labels around too frivolously these days?
We certainly know that these things are very common, but it's really important to be aware of, I think, one of the things I've challenged some young people around to say, if they don't get the mark they want on a test, they say, I'm so depressed. And I try and encourage them to change that terminology to something along the lines of, instead of you're really depressed, you had a bad day, or at the moment, things didn't go to plan. So we do need to be really clear that we describe mental illness as a medical condition because there are serious changes. So we do need to be very clear about that. Yeah.
It's oh God, I'm actually a bit apprehensive to even talk about it because it can just be jumped on and taken in the wrong way. Because I totally think that mental health needs talking about and needs light shining on it, but also at the same time it needs defining. And people need to actually understand it, because I think that, it's kind of like, when especially in the teenage years, when you're searching for an identity, things like being anxious or depressed can almost like become your identity, and you can use it as a mechanism to get things that you want when you might not actually necessarily be actually experiencing those things. I know in my life, I've certainly used things as to kind of work in my favor, and even labeled myself with things when I was younger, like dyslexic, because I didn't want to read in class when I definitely wasn't dyslexic. And I think that, like you mentioned, the careful definition of what depression is and the fact that it's something that is ongoing is important things to know. And I think in the book you say it has, when it actually starts to have lasting negative consequences on your life and the lives of people around you. So I know addiction's the same as that. It's when it actually starts to have negative effects on your life and those around you.
Yeah, I think with all this stuff, it's really important to let someone like a counsellor, a psychologist, or a doctor make a diagnosis, because, for example, if someone has a brain injury, they can feel really down. And I think this is very easy to get misdiagnosed as depression, but a lot of the treatments for depression don't work for a brain injury. So it's really important that if you think this is affecting you, get it checked out and see what a qualified health professional says.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a scary scary thing. I mean, I'm a little bit apprehensive to recommend the GP. I know it's something that you do, because I think we're scared that like people, doctors can too easily just kind of give out medication and stuff, but they can also be gatekeepers, because when we do get overwhelmed and we don't know what to do, like, how do you get help? And they can actually be the gatekeeper that can pass you on to the right person.
One of the things about depression is that it can affect our ability to think and concentrate. So even sometimes really simple decisions, such as choosing a breakfast cereal, can become overwhelming to people with depression. So sometimes we say choose a counsellor, but then if someone with depression Googles counsellor in their area, sometimes so many results come up and it can just be overwhelming for people. And they think, oh, this is all too hard, I don't know what to do. So for those people, I say go and see your doctor, because it's one place to go. Hopefully everyone has a doctor. You should be able to get to see a doctor within 24 hours. And sometimes wait lists on counselling can be a bit longer. And then a doctor can see what's needed and often point you in the right direction. As you mentioned, I host a radio show, and I've asked person after person with personal experience of this, if you had one bit of advice for someone going through this, what would it be? And person after person has said to me they wished they knew they could change counsellors or doctors. So in other words, if the help you're getting is not helping you, it is all right to change.
Definitely. As someone who's training to be a counsellor at the moment, the variety of personalities in that room is unbelievable, like how different everybody is and has a different style that fits different people. So yeah, that's definitely something that can be done. And there's a couple of points that you made about depression that were really interesting as well. Depression makes us forget people love us. That's the big one.
Yeah, so one of the things we've found is there's a part of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex, which is how we use to think about ourselves. And we found that often people that are depressed, this part of the brain doesn't work so well. Recently, someone told me that they made a serious suicide attempt, and they woke up in hospital, and all their friends and family were crying at their bedside because they loved this person so much. But the person that made the suicide attempt, they genuinely believed that this was all an act for the doctors, and secretly all their friends and family wanted them dead. So one of the things I try and get across in the book is that depression is not just feeling sad. In some cases, it can really distort people's thinking. So depression is far more than just feeling sad. Now, not everyone with depression has this distorted thinking, but some people do.
Yeah, and it's definitely something you hear a lot, is that people who are depressed feel like they're a burden, and they don't want to ask for help. They don't want to cause irritation to people, because they think that by asking them they're annoying them, or and they think that they would actually be better off without them. And something that I say to people who are considering taking their life is, I mean, I've been to so many funerals of people who've taken their own life, and the scene is just devastating. There's been, in every case, hundreds of people, because they were all so young, there's been hundreds of people there who were just absolutely in bits, who were just devastated, devastated by this happening. And this is someone who thought that no one cared about them, and they just, in every case, couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah. So sometimes actively telling people that I really value you, you mean a lot to me, can be really helpful. But it's important to know that if people have severe depression, sometimes they don't understand this or they don't take it on board, and that's really when you need an expert to come on board to help them out.
Yeah. There was, there's definitely a lot of situations that are far too complicated to, I come across it a lot, where it's just like, this is far beyond me and what I'm capable of, and probably even dangerous for me to get involved with. But as you say, I think in most cases, people just need someone to talk to.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I try and get across, that there's a lot of things that ordinary everyday people can do that can save someone's life. But then, yes, there certainly are things that need to be left to an expert in this stuff, because it can be very complicated.
Yeah. I forgot a point when we was talking about the overwhelm. I went blank, so I moved on, but I've just remembered it again, which is handy. When it comes to being overwhelmed, there can be so much benefit with reaching out to a friend and saying, please, can you help me with this problem that I have? I'm finding it really hard and impossible to deal with. And they will come along and 9 times out of 10 be like, okay, this is really simple. I can do this in 5 minutes, no problem. And so that, just because in that situation that you're in, you just can't deal with what's in front of you at the time. And to someone else, it's not a problem. And that is, yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned before choosing a breakfast cereal. You know, most of us can go to the supermarket. It takes us 30 seconds to choose a breakfast cereal. It's a very easy thing to do. But if someone has depression, that really simple decision can be overwhelming. And sometimes it might take someone 20 or 30 minutes just to try and make that decision. And then some people are so overwhelmed they can't even decide, so they walk out. You know, I know people that have, you know, got straight A's in school and done very well, and yet depression seems to affect their ability to think and concentrate. So this is why instead of, you know, telling people to speak up about this, because sometimes they don't recognise they have it or they don't know what to do, we need to reach out to people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There was another point that you made that's, I think, really enlightening for people, that depression can manifest as anger.
So, yeah, I think we have this idea that a lot of people, when they're depressed, they will cry. And I want to be absolutely clear, some people will cry, some people will be very visibly sad, but for other people it can come out through anger and irritability. Now, all of us have probably had a time when someone's cut us off in traffic, and, you know, we want to give them the finger, we want to swear at them. That's sort of normal anger, there's a reason for that. But when we talk about the anger associated with depression, if the anger's ongoing, if people get upset all the time over little things, that could be an indicator. One other symptom that I want to mention that often isn't talked about with depression is that actually people that are depressed sometimes feel numbness or no emotions. So sometimes we ask people, how do they feel? And they say, I don't know. And we think they don't want to tell us. But actually numbness sometimes can be a significant sign that someone's really depressed.
Yeah, and that's making me think about so many instances that I've come across in my own life, and you ask someone how they feel and they say, I don't know, and you get frustrated, and it's like, why don't you know? And they're just like, I don't know, and they're frustrated, and, you know, and that my lack of compassion has made a lot of situations a lot worse. And I can think of some specific cases, as, you know, in relationships, that one can come up a lot, can't it?
And I think we assume that there's some people that have quite a high emotional intelligence and they'll always know exactly how they feel, what's going on for them. But then it's important to know that not everyone has that. And especially if you add something like depression into the mix, if choosing a breakfast cereal, which is something that is so simple to do, becomes overwhelming, trying to look inside yourself and trying to work out, how do I feel today? It's just one step too far. You know, choosing a breakfast cereal is that difficult. Trying to work out your emotions is really quite tough. And so that's one of the reasons that a lot of people can struggle.
I think it's a big subject. But what would you recommend to someone who's suffering with depression?
Yeah. So there's two sides to this. The first thing is, if you recognize this in yourself, I really encourage you to speak to someone. And sometimes we think, oh, well, you've got to wait till it's really bad before you do something. But if you feel like things are starting to go wrong, it's far easier to manage some of this stuff before it becomes a problem. So if you're not sure where to go, I said a doctor can be a really great place. However, there are lots of different social services. For example, in Christchurch, where I live, we estimate there are between 700 to 900 different social services. So there are a lot of places. And if you go to one and you're told, oh, the wait list's too long or they can't help you, there will be another one. In New Zealand, a really good place to find these is something called the Family Services Directory. So that has a complete list of all the help and support agencies throughout New Zealand. So there's a heck of a lot of them out there. I did say that sometimes people are just so overwhelmed. If you're so overwhelmed and you just don't know what to do, this is all too difficult, either tell a family member and just say, or a trusted friend, and just say, this is all too difficult. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Can I go see a GP? And they should be able to help me. The reason I say a GP is hopefully everyone knows how to go and see a doctor. When everything's really difficult, that's probably the simplest and easiest place to go to. If you recognize that someone has depression, it's really important that you go up to them. And what you should do is you should say what you've seen. So, for example, if you know that someone used to be a really happy person, they used to seem to have a lot of energy about them, and they used to come to lots of social events, but now you've noticed there's been a significant negative change in them. Now you've noticed that, well, they don't seem to be as happy as they used to, and they're not coming to social events. You should go up to them and you should say, lately, I have noticed you don't seem to be yourself. You don't seem to have the same happiness that you used to, and you don't seem to be going out as much. I'm not angry, but I'm really concerned about you. Have you noticed this too? And if you say either I have noticed or I am concerned, people tend to respond to that. Just one other point, it's really important that if you notice this in someone, make it your responsibility to go up to them and have that conversation. Unfortunately, I often talk to large workplaces with, say, 100 or 200 people, and it turns out everyone knows that someone's struggling, but no one did anything about it. And sometimes they all think, well, someone else will do something. And of course, if everyone thinks someone else will do something about this, no one does.
I think that's especially difficult when someone's manifesting that anger as well. I've noticed when people get angry at me or they criticize me or they're not nice to me, in the past I would have reacted to that, but now I kind of like ask myself, what's going on?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
And quite often they will break down in that situation and be like, oh, actually, no, I'm not.
I think it's very easy to look at some behaviour and just think this person's, such a bad person. I remember a while ago I saw this Facebook post and someone said, I was so angry, I went to the supermarket today, there was this mother there with 3 children, they were all screaming, she didn't do anything, she was such a bad mother, and they went on to criticise her. And I thought, well, hold on a minute, what could be going on there? I mean, yes, she could be a bad mother, but, she could have something like postnatal depression, or, she could be having a really rough time. Did anyone think, well, hold on, what could be behind all this?
Yeah, definitely. A lot more compassion is needed to deal with these things. And as I say, one of the things that I found mind-blowing is when I've actually not reacted and I've actually held space for someone who's been angry at me or even horrible to me, said horrible things, and I've asked them, like, what's like, I'm really sorry that you've seen what I've done in this way. I'm trying to do this, and I'm just wondering if you're all right. And actually, so far, 100% of the cases, I mean, every time they've all ended up being like, for one, I'm sorry that I said that. Every time they've said I'm sorry, and actually I'm having a difficult time. So I think if you feed anger compassion, it doesn't really know what to do with itself, and it actually leads to a healing situation.
We don't talk about this so much today, but a lot of early philosophers, they realised that there was a very strong link between anger and depression, and often if actually people are angry, deep down they're sad about something. So yeah, that compassion is so important.
Yeah, and I think from a spiritual perspective, it's linked to anger's linked to being hurt, and there's been something that you wanted, and more likely someone has got in the way of that, and you're holding resent towards someone for something. Next point, I think that was a really valuable thing to talk about. Rumination. Rumination is something that I actually think is completely overlooked and missed almost entirely by people, and seen to be something that's totally normal. But through being a drug addict and running addiction meetings and learning about addiction, I've discovered that it's actually almost like it's a mechanism for escaping reality.
Yeah. So what we mean by rumination is, let's say someone had a breakup 4 or 5 years ago. If they can't get that out of their mind, if it's going round their head again and again, they try and lie down to sleep, they just can't, and it just goes round and round in their head, we call that rumination. We found that that can be a risk factor for suicide. It can be a factor in people having anxiety. It can also be a factor if people have post-traumatic stress disorder. We often think that, if something bad happened to you 10 years ago, well, you should just get over it. But we found if people have post-traumatic stress, they can't get those memories out of their head. They relive it as if it is happening to them again and again and again. So we tell people to get over it, but actually it's not as though it's in the past to them. They relive it as if it's happening to them now. So yeah, all those things can cause rumination.
Would an excessive amount of thinking, like an extremely overactive mind, be a case of rumination, or is it only related to specific memories that repeat themselves?
Oh, there can be many things. I mean, for some people, it would be one specific thing that happened. Maybe they feel they were unjustly fired from a job or something like that. And then for other people, it's not one specific thing. It's just everything seems to go around in their mind. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know when I start to feel emotional discomfort, I very much end up in my mind, and my mind just races. Yeah. And it says, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that. And then it's like, oh, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, you're the best, actually. And then all of a sudden, no, you're not good enough. And it flicks from like one of those things back and forth. It's total insanity. And then you're just sat there listening to all this stuff going on in your head, and you are going crazy. Quite often it's because I don't want to face something emotional, and my mind just eats me alive. And I've found that through trying to deal with uncomfortable situations and get a little bit of a better grasp on reality and taking responsibility for things has definitely helped with that a lot.
Yeah, and we often think that, you'd go to a counsellor if you're feeling sad, but most counsellors should be able to help with rumination. They should be able to teach you some skills and techniques. Just one really simple one. If you find like your mind's racing, you can't get stuff out of your head, taking a physical pen and paper and writing for about 10 or 15 minutes, just whatever's on your mind. The technical name for this is expressive writing. Some people call it journaling. Often that's been found to just get these thoughts out of your head. Now, some people think, oh, well, I'm not very good at writing. You don't even have to write words. You could draw pictures or something. But basically, it's the act of trying to take whatever's in your mind and getting that out of your head.
I think engaging in that action in itself as well, and doing something when you like that is really helpful, isn't it? To actually to do something. What are some signs that people might be feeling suicidal?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, some do happen very quickly, but for other ones, there are very clear warning signs. So some of them can include things like talking a lot about death. So sometimes people become obsessed with, say, Nazi concentration camps. They just seem to have this real interest in death for no obvious reason. Things like giving away prized possessions. So if out of the blue someone posts for sale all their possessions on Facebook, start asking questions. I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. We mentioned ruminative thoughts. We mentioned also things like if someone says there's no point anymore. If someone feels hopeless. Now, one of the problems is a lot of people don't go around saying, I feel hopeless, but if they have a relationship breakup and they say something like, I'm never going to find anyone else, well, that's a hopeless statement. So you need to recognize that. Those tend to be the big ones, but the other one is suddenly getting better after a long history of depression. So we'd think if someone's been depressed for a really long period of time, they suddenly get better. Well, surely that would be a good thing, but what we've found is that often they've made a decision to end it, and that's why they're happy. Obviously, those are some of the main ones, but if you think, look, there's just something not quite right here, or they're actively talking about suicide, or you're concerned about them, you need to go up to them and have a conversation. Again, some people think, well, this is not my job, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't do this. Well, We don't have psychiatrists patrolling the streets looking for people that are suicidal, so actually the person most likely to pick this up is ordinary everyday people. I called my book Being a True Hero because although I think ordinary everyday people can be the ones that see this, if you are willing to help someone in the situation, you can be a hero. You can be someone extraordinary. So if you do recognise that someone's suicidal, you should say what you've seen. So for example, if someone says, I can't go on, I'm never going to get another job again, my life's ruined, you'd say to them, you just said to me you think your life is ruined. I know this might be a really difficult question, but does this mean you are thinking about suicide? And you must use the word suicide or kill yourself. If you say, are you going to do something stupid? People think, well, that could mean get drunk or something like that. So you need to be really explicit. I've asked I've asked hundreds or thousands of people this question, and no one's been offended. You know, if they're not suicidal, they say, oh no, it's not that bad, but I'm glad you asked. And if they are suicidal, they're usually glad you told them. So if ever someone does tell you something big, like they're suicidal, a great way to respond is, I am so glad you told me that. If someone's just admitted they're feeling suicidal, they'll probably be feeling vulnerable. But if they hear the words, I'm so glad you told me that, then they'll know they told a safe person. Now, at this point, you don't need to, if you're not a counsellor or someone like that, you don't need to try and help them at that point, but you need to get them to help. So if you're not sure where to take them, as I said, a GP can be a really good place. Maybe you know there's a good counselling service. If you think someone's in danger of death or serious harm immediately, they're about to die then and there, you need to call 111. I've only ever had to do that 3 times because people were about to die then and there. All 3 of them were furious about it. They all said, you effing, I'm going to... Yep, they didn't respond too well. However, one of them thanked me that night, one of them thanked me a couple of weeks later, and one of them thanked me a few months later. So, even if you have to really upset someone at the time, their life is more important than that. One of the other things to know is confidentiality. Sometimes people say, oh, well, I'll only tell you that if you promise not to tell anyone else. And if they say that, you should say, I won't tell anyone else unless I think you or someone else is in danger. But if you have to break someone's confidentiality, human life is always more important than confidential information. Now, if you want a little bit more detail about this, if you go to my website, beingatruehero.com, there's a tab there, sample chapters, and I've got this all written down in one of the sample chapters there, either as a text file or as an audio file. So if you want to know a little bit more about how to do this, that's all there.
Yeah. A couple of points I've made that I thought about while he's talking about that. Sometimes we don't want to engage with someone who's suicidal. We just think that is not, that's risky, and there's, we just don't want to have anything to do with that. But it's far better to try and help someone than it is to have a suicide on your conscience. That doesn't go away. And almost every case you can be successful in helping someone to not do that, because it's actually the majority, it's actually not that hard. Just by
And if someone's suicidal, any help is better than no help at all.
Definitely. And if someone tells you that they're suicidal, I always encourage them to tell someone, at least someone who is close to them, preferably a family member if you have a good relationship with them, because they're the people who are really there to help you in most cases. And if they're not someone who does care about you.
And if you do have to ask someone about suicide or you're concerned, you're never on your own with this. You can always ring Healthline, you could ring Youthline, you could ring Lifeline. Any of these agencies will be happy to help you and say, if you ring them and say, look, I'm really concerned about this person, I think they could be suicidal, what do I do? They'd be happy to help you. And if for any reason they don't help you, try another one or try a different service.
Okay, thank you. So is there a connection between addiction and suicide?
There certainly can be. I want to be very clear, not everyone that's an addict will become suicidal, but certainly we do know some people do. The form of addiction with the highest suicide rate is problem gambling, and one of the problems is people can lose literally their entire life savings in an afternoon. And one of the problems is that while people are doing some of these things, they feel wonderful, but when they stop, they feel absolutely dreadful. But also other forms of addiction, such as alcohol, marijuana, methamphetamine. Yeah, absolutely, there can be a link between this. I also think when people relapse, we often think, if someone says they're going to get clean and they relapse, they're a loser. But actually, it's important to know that relapse is often a significant part of the journey to recovery. And many people relapse multiple times. That doesn't mean they're a failure. That doesn't mean they're not going to recover. It just means they've had a small setback.
Definitely. I know some people who've relapsed 14 times and they now have years of recovery. But it took them 14 times and some pretty colourful scenes to get to that point, going to meetings, flipping tables, shouting at people, but in the end they get there. So yeah, failure is definitely something that I'm looking forward to talking about shortly with you, because I know that you have an amazing stories surrounding that. I'd just like to say, wouldn't like to say, it's not fun to say, but I know that out of all my friends that have taken their lives, nearly all of them were drug related. Not that the drugs were necessarily the problem, although in some cases I know that they were, but they were nearly all using drugs, which I think part of the problem is it just you can't deal with your problems properly when you're using drugs, and it comes to a point where they've been your stability and they don't. The problem with all drugs is that they only work for a while before they start to not be so effective, and you end up left with a problem.
And I think if we can talk about realistic stories of recovery, such as, the person you mentioned relapsing 14 times, and that people can get better, because I think a lot of people think, I've relapsed 2 or 3 times, I just can't do this, it's impossible. So I think if we talk about the fact that people can recover from this successfully, that may be able to help some people that are feeling hopeless or suicidal.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a note here. I don't know whether to leave this to the end, but I'll probably forget, so we'll just go for it now. Do you think, and you'll have to bear with us here because it sounds like it's not cool, but it kind of is a hopeful point. Do you think that it is a good time to have a mental illness now?
I do, actually. So the earliest writings that we have around mental illness were written about 7,000 years ago. That's a really long time. Believe it or not, it's only really sort of the last 20 or 30 years that we've actually got really good at treating some of this stuff. I recently read a book called The Traumatic Neuroses of War, which was one of the first books ever written on PTSD. And it's a relatively thick book, and at the end there's about that much on how to help someone with this. And the author, Abram Gardner, said that if you've had this for a long time, you're stuck with it and there's nothing we can do. Yeah, that was written in 1941, which really wasn't that long ago. Today, we never say that about someone with PTSD. There's so many exciting treatments coming out. Just to give you a couple of examples of this, it's not widely available here in New Zealand, but for people with treatment-resistant depression, there's a new medication called ketamine, and that's been shown to help people with treatment-resistant depression, and that's probably going to dramatically change the rates of this. There's all sorts of exciting treatments. Another fairly new one is something called EMDR. So one of the problems we know with trauma is that people get stuck in that trauma. I know I used to be the chair of the Canterbury Men's Centre, and one of the services we had there was male survivors of sexual abuse. And there was a man there that had been sexually abused at age 5, and he said literally every day of his life he'd have nightmares, and he was 55 years old. So for 50 years he'd had terrible nightmares about this experience. He'd been to all sorts of counsellors, and they'd all told him it wasn't your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, and he was stuck in that thinking. He went through this treatment called EMDR, which Prince Harry's actually just gone through, and it seemed to stop and pacify some of these memories. It sounds like the slightly unusual therapy, but it involves the therapist moving their finger in front of your face like that, or either tapping on different sides of your body. And we know there's actually your body has a natural way to deal with trauma that happens in a phase of sleep called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. That's when you pacify your memories from the previous day. And we found that people that have experienced a lot of trauma, they wake up before they get to this critical phase of sleep. So they never get that healing phase of sleep. We call rapid eye movement sleep rapid eye movement because your eyes move rapidly at night. And the theory with EMDR is that somehow doing this tricks your brain into thinking that you're in that phase of sleep when you can actually heal from all your memories. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading experts on this, has found that EMDR is one of the most successful forms of treatment that he's ever tried with his patients. So the point is, there's some new and exciting treatments out there. So if you have to have a mental illness, I'd say that any time in history, today would be the best time to have it because there's really good treatment out there now.
After I read about the rapid eye movement and the EMDR, I actually sat and did that with my finger in front of my face just to see, I wonder what happens. Maybe this is going to improve my quality of life. I don't know. I
don't know if you can do it on yourself, unfortunately.
That would be a nice fix. I don't know. Have a go. It can't hurt. But the irony of, and this is ironic, is that I am actually a ketamine addict.
Yeah.
I haven't used for quite a long time, but I had a serious problem with that. And I can safely say that it definitely does help with mental health problems and depression. But if you use the quantities that I did for as long as I did, it has seriously bad health problems. I have friends who literally need organ transplants, and it's really not cool to be addicted to it because it's an anesthetic and a tranquilizer.
Yes, it's just to clarify, ketamine's not just something you go to your local drug dealer and buy. At the moment in New Zealand, it needs to be given by a psychiatrist. They have special doses of it, and there's obviously pretty strict protocols around how it's used for just such reasons, because yes, under the wrong circumstances, it can be highly addictive. But when used with the right doses and under careful medical supervision, it does really seem to help a lot of people with depression.
I mean, one of the things that it does is it actually disassociates you from your senses so that the external stimuluses that might drive you absolutely nuts and cause you a massive amount of anxiety kind of get shut off. And I do think that it enables you to actually get in on a level that you wouldn't be able to without that. It's, I could see how it could be an extremely useful tool. It's something that I've not delved into too deeply just because of my history with it. I know that with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, they're having unbelievable results as well when it comes to actually curing PTSD. But, if you go out just using these things willy-nilly, you're actually going to end up in a real mess.
Yeah, you've obviously got to be very careful with the dosage. They talk about microdosing with this stuff, so... this is why a psychiatrist is a medical doctor, that they've done a medical degree that's usually 7 years, and then they've done 5 additional years of training on that. So at the moment in New Zealand, these are the people that are authorised to dispense this, because of the reasons there can be side effects. So, this is not child's play here. There can be very serious consequences. But when used correctly, it does seem to be making a very powerful difference.
Yeah. I have a lot of friends who've microdosed on psychoactive things like psilocybin from magic mushrooms and stuff. Yeah. But I also know a lot of friends who've actually got psychosis or schizophrenia from using these things as well. So it's, do that one with a professional if you're going to take that approach. And if you've been an addict, it's probably not going to work for you. Yeah.
Although there is some evidence around MDMA, the one that treats PTSD, that when used correctly, it may actually treat addictions. There's some interesting research there.
One of the things that you said about, it's a good time to treat mental illnesses now because in the 80s they were actually trying to remove parts of people's brain to cure mental illnesses, that's extreme. So I'm extremely pleased that they haven't tried to hack out a part of my brain to cure my addiction. Addiction reverses our reward systems. it rewards us for the destructive behaviours. That was a point from the book that's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of is what's going on. It's turned the world upside down.
Yeah. I mean, when people get addicted to something, they get a hit of the chemical called dopamine, and you're supposed to get dopamine, when you connect with people, when you eat, when you exercise, when you do, say, challenging things. But unfortunately, addiction gives you that hit at the wrong times, like sometimes for stealing money, sometimes doing wrong things. So yeah, it really flips everything on its head.
Yeah. Eating disorders. This is one that I think is so. We're going through all these points, and the reason why you've listed all these points, isn't it, is because these are all things that are preventative when it comes to suicide, and they all need their own attention, really, because they all lead to this. And an eating disorder is massive, and another one that is totally under the radar because people can hide it so well. And I think that it's just like such a prevalent problem, especially with women. And I know a lot who I've known for a long time, and then they've told me this, and you've known them for so long, and you had no idea that they were going through this. Something you mentioned in the
well, men as well. Men do have quite high rates of this as well.
Yeah,
so.
I've actually started to suffer with bulimia towards the end of my addiction because I got sober from drugs, and it's kind of like I'd not dealt with the problem. And even though I was totally sober, this problem that I had actually started to manifest in binge eating, which just was evidence that I actually needed to deal with a problem that wasn't actually related to drugs. There was something that I needed to deal with that was going to manifest in a whole myriad of ways, whether it was rumination or addiction, or eating disorders, or whatever it might have been. All of these things, depression, anxiety, all these things were actually manifesting from this problem that I had that I needed to actually deal with.
And I think it's one of the things I try and get at is that, addiction's just a symptom. We need to look at the causes, what's going on underneath this stuff.
Definitely. I know you mentioned Gabor Mate in your book, who is doing amazing work. And various. I think that's one of the nice things that I really liked about your book is the way you've written it, because you've written it in such a simple and accessible way that's touched on such a broad amount of subjects that are all so important, and made it so kind of good and easy for the reader, mentioning books and things to watch, and I really liked the way that you did that.
One of my big motivations for writing this book was I realised there's quite a lot of technical academic books on this, and they're not easy to read. And so I wanted a book that was accessible for people, that tried to take some of this quite complicated research and tried to make it accessible for people.
And I think most people don't have the self-control to do that because you can just get carried away.
Believe me, I struggle too. Sometimes I read these dense journal articles and I read and think, right, didn't understand a word of that. Let's try again. They're not easy things. So I've tried to, simplify some of this research.
Yeah, I usually do the introduction, skim, and conclusion, and then I'm just trying to figure that, they probably, because if I read a full journal article, I do not know what's going on. It's above me. So one of the things you said, 20% of people who suffer from anorexia die from suicide. And that's just massive, isn't it? That's disproportionately large compared to, I think, practically all of the others. Yeah.
So just to clarify, anorexia is where people want to be unbelievably thin. And what we've found is that most people, when they see food, they feel pleasure, and when they don't eat, they feel anxiety and fear if they don't eat for long enough. With anorexia, that's flipped on its head. So people actually feel anxiety when they think about eating food, and they actually get a sense of pleasure from not eating. And the problem is, we know that eating is one of the most vital life functions. And so to have an illness that can trick your brain into thinking, well, eating's a bad thing, this becomes incredibly serious. So it's thought anorexia is the most lethal mental illness there is. If you recognize recognise this in someone, it is important to get them help as quickly as possible. There's a great organisation in New Zealand called EDANS, Eating Disorders Association of New Zealand. If you're concerned about someone and you're not sure how to help them, you can email them and they can give you some advice.
That's great, because I think that is such a sensitive one to approach, and to actually approach someone and to talk about this, you've got to be really careful what you say when it comes to anorexia, because anything related to self-worth or body image or anything that's just, and the worst thing you can say to them is just eat some food. Why don't you just eat? Because they want to, but they can't.
Yeah. So again, that's one of the ones you really need a medical expert for. It's a very, very complicated illness.
Yeah. Something else you said, there's an absolutely enormous need to challenge the photoshopped world. I mean, I think even though I know about this and I look into this all the time, I think even it gets me. You spend so much time trawling through the internet that you just forget that this is all fake. I mean, it's disproportionately fake. Everything that we're looking at.
Yeah. And so I think, unfortunately, the Photoshop culture does lead to a lot of people thinking they have to be perfect and they have unrealistic expectations.
And also that the insanity of perfection, or the insanity of social normality. I mean, we've seen in our lifetime it go from stick thin to quite the opposite, or to the pronunciation of the arse or lips or shapes of eyebrows, or it's so. It's a trend, it's a fashion, and these things are going to come in and out, and, whatever your body shape is, at some point it'd probably be a fashion trend. So it's a matter of patience, I think, because it's been unbelievable how polarizing what's perfect has been in my lifetime. That leads us on to bullying and cyberbullying, and why that's so problematic at the moment. Yeah,
so we used to think that, pretty much everyone got bullied. It happened to everyone. People just got over it. But in the last 20 years, we've had a significant amount of psychological research that shows that bullying can have a devastating impact on people. And tragically, occasionally it does lead to people wanting to die by suicide. So I think it's really important to understand how serious this is, that if we recognise this happening, that we take active and practical steps to stop this. Cyberbullying is one that a lot of people are really concerned about, and they think, I'm not sure how I deal with this. But if you go to NetSafe, they've got some really good information on their website about how to handle cyberbullying. I think sometimes people think, well, it's online, you can't do anything about it. But actually, in New Zealand in 2015, there was the Harmful Digital Communications Act. So a lot of online bullying is now actually a criminal offence. So there are actually things that can be done about this.
It's hard, isn't it? Because you're saying that with bullying, it's a hard one to address, because, trying to solve the problem can actually cause more problems sometimes. It's not an easy one to deal with.
Yeah. But I think, even if it is challenging, we still need to try and handle this.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the points you mentioned was the fact that bullying used to happen between, certain times of the day, at school, at lunchtime, but now it's 24 hours a day with social media.
Yeah. So that's why, we need to educate people about what is acceptable, and if this is happening to you, this is how you find help.
Yeah. And I think this subject is kind of related to what we was talking about earlier with people being angry or not being nice. And we have to ask ourselves, why are people not being nice? Quite often it will be related to jealousy. Jealousy's just been a massive factor for people bullying, and insecurity.
Yeah. So if we can look at some of the underlying reasons of this, unfortunately, all the research says if you just tell people don't bully each other, that doesn't really work. You've got to look at what's going on underneath this. One really interesting study found that if you can help the school bully to get better sleep, a lot of that bullying tends to go away. So potentially sleep could be an underlying factor with this.
I mean, I was personally been on both sides of the bullying thing. I got bullied, and then I thought that my problem to my solutions was to do it before it happened to me. So when I went to secondary school, I started trying to be the bully, and fortunately, I'm not tough. I realised that one backfired on me really quick. So it's kind of like this is more hassle than it's worth. I'm not going to do this, but it just showed me that hurt people because it didn't have a good effect on me. And when I really look at the reasons why I did that, I can understand that I did that out of insecurity and being hurt. So it's like who's the victim? I think most bullies have been a victim of something else, and the way that they're treated by possibly at home, and having a bit of an understanding and compassion for everyone, feeding those situations compassion, but also dealing with them, in a way that if it's possible to deal with them, not necessarily be understanding, but also firm, I guess. I've got a quote here from something that you said. We teach kids trigonometry, but we don't teach them how to ask for help. I've never had someone walk up to me on the street and ask me the interior angle of a triangle. And I just want to say, trigonometry gets a lot of stick, doesn't it? Out of all the things taught at school, trigonometry gets the most abuse.
Yep. But we teach all these things that probably we don't actually use a heck of a lot, and yet some of these really important things like how do you help a friend in a bad situation, where are some places where you can go for help, until very recently wasn't taught to people. So we need to cover this more.
I don't. Sorry to the teaching world. I don't know how emotionally intelligent a lot of teachers are. I don't know, and I think that also.
I think there's a lot that do really try, but it's a bit of a challenge sometimes, and a lot of them are forced with a curriculum to teach,
and stress and deadlines and sleep and people who drink alcohol or drinking wine to cope with their stress and this compounding effect and looking after teenagers. I mean. I guess I know it's not easy, but also at the same time, I know that I definitely had a lot of teachers who weren't especially in touch with their emotions in the school that I were into, and I mean we just had nothing related to emotions or coping in our school.
Yeah, it is starting to change now. Like lots of schools are bringing this in, so it has been good to see.
What have I got here? Expectations are too high. The dangers of trying to fit in. This is something that I'm kind of really, really enthusiastic about teaching in schools, because I think that if there's a point where things go wrong, and especially when they went wrong for me, came from trying to fit in. I mean, no one wants to do drugs and drink alcohol, really. I mean, you try alcohol and you're like, what the fuck? Tastes terrible, So, and why would you persist with doing that thing? And it's only peer pressure. And I mean, bullying, I think that's got a lot to do with peer pressure. And I did make a note from a little bit later on and how we deal with concrete thinking of teenagers, because I don't actually know if I'd know how to deliver a message to teenagers effectively. I mean, that's difficult, isn't it? Getting, I mean, I think when with teenagers and especially younger, like you try and deliver a message, but we can't understand that they don't think the same way that we think.
Yeah, we've certainly learned that the teenage brain undergoes quite a bit of redevelopment, and so sometimes the way that we try and communicate with teenagers isn't always the way that works with adults. So, for example, if we take smoking, the way we've traditionally told teenagers to stop smoking is we say, if you do this in 30 or 40 years, you'll get cancer. And one of the things we know about the teenage brain is that they struggle with long-term consequences. But if you say, you look like an idiot in front of your friends if you do this, if you use consequences that are in the here and now, that can make a big difference. So if we're trying to communicate some of the stuff to teenagers about, not doing drugs and alcohol and some of the stuff, we need to actually try and talk in their language and try and look at consequences that look at today.
That's an amazing point that you just made. That's a powerful point, which that's really definitely helpful for me and how I'm going to be approaching things. And I mean, to be honest, if you give me long-term consequences, even at 31 years old, I'm still not great, but I'm probably a little bit behind. I think, and drug addiction, I think, keeps people in concrete thinking as well. I don't know if that's a fact, but certainly with my development,
for quite a few people, in fact, we think half of all adults have concrete thinking. So, trying to communicate some of this stuff to people. So, concrete thinking is, thinking of things in the here and now, like very practical things. For example, if you ask some people what love is, they'll say, it's getting gifts, and other people say, love is about sacrifice or commitment. And commitment and sacrifice, they're abstract things. So sometimes people struggle to see the world in abstract ways. So sometimes with these people, the more concretely we can communicate, the better it is.
Do they think that's affected by trauma?
Yeah. So we certainly think that a lot of people that have been through trauma, they have very concrete thinking.
I think my addiction was a factor in that as well. With my brain development, I started, using drugs when I was about 12. So I think that had an enormous effect on my brain development. I certainly noticed that through my recovery, I started to be able to adult a lot easier.
Yep.
This was a point that I thought was really nice, and it relates to what we spoke about earlier with overwhelm, and something you said that you talk about when you do talks in schools, and you tell people that to put a mental health number in their phone just for when they are overwhelmed or are in situations where they need to access that, so that it's not overwhelming. You don't have to trawl through Google, and it's just a simple process.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that unfortunately we can tell people all this stuff. You can tell people, there are these great helplines, there are these great services, and then unfortunately when some people become really distressed, they forget about this stuff. So I encourage a lot of school students that I speak to, get out your phone, and they often don't want to do it for themselves. I say, look, put this in your phone. You might have a mate that could need this one day. Just put it in there. You never know when it'll be useful. Then my hope is that they might actually use this. Sometimes if people do get really overwhelmed, I encourage them to write down, like who loves them, some phone numbers they could call, and, put it in the bathroom, put it by their bed, put it in their purse or wallet. It's trying to make sure that information is there when they need it.
Yeah. It's like a safety net.
Yeah.
I think we covered this one. Telling people not to do something doesn't work.
Yeah. So one of the things we found is that we're really good at imagining the words no, don't, or can't. And so we're really good at imagining most things, but we can't imagine the words no, don't, or can't. And so if you say to someone, just don't kill yourself, sometimes they don't actually hear that, because you can't imagine the word no, don't. So sometimes if you tell people don't kill yourself, all they hear is kill yourself. Sometimes we need to give positive messages like, I really want you to stay alive. I really want you to be here now.
It's definitely the case with my addiction and with addiction in general and recovery in general. If you tell people don't do drugs, they think about drugs. You need to tell them what to do. If you're going to give someone some advice, then you need to give them some practical, simple advice that they can actually do. And I know that, like I spoke about earlier, about addiction not being about drugs, it's about the problem that's underlying all the things, all the symptoms. So you need to help someone address those problems instead. We spoke a little bit about loneliness earlier. This was actually, I think, probably my favourite point from the whole book, because this actually is life-changing for me, and I sympathise with everybody who suffers with this. Loneliness is a huge factor. Social anxiety and not being able to start conversations. If that resonates with anyone, I feel your pain. I'm really bad at small talk. I'm unbelievably bad at starting a conversation with someone if I don't know anything about them, and we're just in a neutral thing. Like I go into a pub or club or any of those things or anything. Parties was just such a painful thing to me. I was that guy who stood in the corner, just the sort of like thinking, what the hell do I say to people? And then ended up saying nothing, drinking too much to the point where I couldn't see, and then just like falling over. That was my life. I think that's why I like drugs so much, because you don't really think about, you don't really worry about the consequences of what you say. You just kind of get on with it. And that ruined my life on a whole nother level. So you recommended a book here, haven't you?
I think so, yeah. So just on that, one of the things we know that can be a really protective factor against suicide is having strong, stable connections and friendships. And unfortunately, a lot of people struggle to know how to talk to people. So in the book, I say, if you meet someone new for the first time, why not just ask them, what do you like doing in your free time? Do you play any sports? Do you watch any movies? Just some really basic get to know you questions can really help and make a difference. And so, it sounds quite easy, but just learning some of those basic questions that you can ask someone new can really help. And then it's important to give good answers, because if someone says, what do you like doing in your free time? And you say, I don't know. Well, the other person doesn't really know how to build on that. So you've got to actually give good answers to be able to help build a conversation. The book I think you're referring to is The Fine Art of Small Talk by Deborah Fine. It's just got some great information in there about how to start a conversation with someone. So if you are struggling to make friends, or you're not sure how to talk to people, that's something that can be improved. It's not a fixed quality. You can change that. And just simply teaching people some basic social skills can really improve their well-being. And it can be a huge protective factor against suicide.
It's so important. I mean, that it's. I think that's one of the things where you can be in a room full of people and feel completely on your own, is because you have no idea how to connect. The book you mentioned was The Complete Book of Questions, 1001 Conversation Starters. And you mentioned a few just then, but those one-liner questions where it's like, you don't need to worry about what you're going to say to someone. You literally need maybe 6 to 10 questions that you have stored, even less, maybe even 1 or 3 in your head. And like, when you walk up to someone, you say this. What were a few of those examples of things that you can say when you walk up to someone?
First of all, just find out their name is always good, so you get to know them. And then just ask something like, what do you like doing in your free time? What have you been doing so far today or this week? If, say, the weekend's coming up, what do you normally do on the weekend? Do you watch movies? Do you read books? Who's in your family? Just basic questions like that. And sooner or later, you should be able to find something that you can connect to the other person with. Yeah.
Not everybody's going to want to talk all the time as well, but most of the time, when you just kind of walk up to someone and just have a go, you got to kind of put yourself in the situation, haven't you? And we'll get to that again. That one's coming up at the end, isn't it? Don't presume that everyone is different. Look for similarities. That's something I did again. That was such an important point.
Yeah. We're really good at saying, this person shouldn't be my friend because, maybe they don't follow the same political party you do, or maybe they don't like the same kind of music you do. And the idea that we can only be friends with people that are similar to us is just total nonsense. In fact, some of my best friends are actually people that are quite different from me. And I think, that's a great chance to learn. So instead of, putting all these barriers why people can't connect with us, we need to realize that actually it's okay to have differences.
It's really a hard one to get over. I think that one of the things that got in my way was kind of like trying to build an identity when I was younger, and I wrapped up who I was in some things that I was not. I wanted to be someone, so I got wrapped up in this techno music scene, and I was this guy that liked this, and I became an acid techno fanatic. And if you didn't like acid techno, we couldn't be friends, and that doesn't leave you with many options, believe me. So I ended up just in a small scene, and and then it took me a long time to undo that. But like, as I've come out of it and really started to find out about who I am, it's kind of like all that stuff that I thought limited me to this small group of people was just such crap, such nonsense, and I had to really open my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think about self-worth and finding self-worth?
Yeah. One of the things we know about many suicide notes is they say, they may not say it in so many words, but they say in some way, I'm worthless, I have no value, no one loves me. And I think sometimes we define our self-worth by thinking, well, you have to be on TV, you have to have lots of money. And actually, those things don't really matter. Study after study has shown that, having lots of money doesn't actually make you happy. After about $70,000, the more millions you add doesn't really add to your happiness. And I think one of the things is we try and define our self-worth by these things, and we find they don't actually make us happy. So I really encourage people, instead of thinking, have you been on TV or something like that, try and encourage people to define their self-worth by the friendships they have, by the contribution they can make to the community. Those are the things that are really important.
Yeah, totally agree. There's been like every single thing in my life that I've wanted that I thought would make me happy. I've got it, found myself wanting more, and I mean like immediately.
Yeah.
There's been some things that I worked for years to get, and the moment I got there, I immediately thought about the next thing. I mean, immediately.
Yep.
It's a frustrating situation, isn't it?
Yeah. It's very challenging. Should we cover failure now?
So there's only two other things. There's only two other things before that. One was how to manage negative emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think sometimes we have this idea that, we're stuck. So if you've got a thought in your head that says, I'm a loser, I'm an idiot, if you find yourself getting really upset, sometimes we think, well, there's actually not much we can do about that. But by and large, feelings and thoughts are actually changeable. So, for example, if you're the sort of person that maybe you made a mistake at work and then you go home and just think, I'm such a loser, I'm such an idiot, and then you're tempted to drink to forget about your problems, it's possible to think, well, hold on, actually, no human being on the planet is perfect. We all make mistakes, and some of those mistakes can be learning opportunities. So if you can try and reframe some of your thoughts in different ways, you can actually change that, and you can often change your feelings with that. So sometimes you can do this yourself. There's lots of good websites and books out there that can help with this. Sometimes seeing someone like a counsellor can give you some techniques and tools to do this as well.
I know you mentioned mindfulness in there as well as being something that's been incredibly helpful, that doesn't always... I can't remember what you said now. I haven't made a note about that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people have heard of mindfulness. That's focusing on the here and now and your breathing. And for some people, that can be absolutely wonderful. That can really help them to calm down. It can really take away a lot of that stress and that worry that people have. But it's important to know that one study found 25% of people that try mindfulness found it actually made them angry. So some of these things, there's no one size fits all. If it works for you, that's great. But if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. There are other techniques that you can try.
Yeah. I think with mindfulness, the essence of mindfulness is being able to step back from your thoughts and actually see yourself as the witness, the observer of the mind, rather than being in the mind and being swept away and caught up in all these things, believing when you say I am worthless, rather than thinking I am worthless, step back and say, my mind is telling me that I'm worthless, but I am separate to those thoughts, and then I can actually get some space from them not be overwhelmed by it, and then make an intelligent decision as to whether that's actually true or not.
Yeah, and let's say you made a small mistake at work, it's easy to think, I'm such an idiot. But then maybe you could think back a year ago, did you make a mistake at work? Did you think it was going to be a really big problem? And now today, no one remembers about it. So sometimes trying to keep things in perspective can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And I find mindfulness is one of the biggest tools that I use in my life that's completely changed it. And as you say, sure, for some people there's some anger coming up, which is probably why you need to do that in conjunction. If you have anger management problems, possibly you need to do that with a counsellor to deal with the emotions that are coming up, and when you're ready. The 7 C's.
Yeah. So this has been, there's various things about resilience. So one of the ideas of resilience is that when something goes wrong, how do we manage this? What can we do to overcome this? Since the book was published, there's actually been a new study which I might talk about. The 7 C's were developed by Kenneth Ginsburg. Is it the right? Yes. Sorry, just a little blank there for a second. Yeah. He built this off other people's research. And what he found was that people that had things like connection, people that were able to contribute to society, if they had these things, if some bad things happened to them, it was far less likely to have a big impact on their life. The new study that I didn't mention in the book was something that looked at what we call positive childhood experiences. And they found that if children were able to, take part in community traditions, if they had at least 2 non-parental adults that took an interest in them, or they could go and talk to them, they found that even if really bad things did happen to them, like sexual abuse or a parent died, that dramatically reduced the negative outcomes, mental health outcomes. So this idea of resilience is actually trying to put things in place so if something does go wrong in life, and I mentioned before that it does happen, trying to build connections. And actually what we know from research is the most important thing you can have in your life is connections. The largest ever study of how to live a long life found that it wasn't, eating well and exercising that actually gave you a long life. It was deep connections. And that's one of the most important factors in resilience. If you're having a bad day, knowing that someone loves you, knowing that someone's there for you, knowing that someone cares about you can really, really make a big difference.
It's so interesting. I mean, everything's kind of going full circle to a degree. All of the ancient wisdom of the world, all of it has focused on love, connection, forgiveness.
Yeah.
All of these things have been at the essence of all of these teachings. And it's kind of like science tried to bypass all of these things for a short while, and then it's kind of now that it's more information has come out about these studies, there's been a lot that have really started to understand the interconnectivity and social aspect and the importance of those things, which is a kind of a shame that society is becoming more individualistic and not less. But hopefully that can change once people realise that that we're facing a mental health epidemic and all kinds of other problems, addiction epidemics, and that we're going in the wrong direction. So, thank you for answering all of these questions, and I know that we've been going for quite a long time, but I just think this is such an important topic, and I'm really grateful that you've come on, and I'm saving the best for last. So can you please share your story with us?
Yeah. So I said before that 1/3 to a half of all suicides are the result of a same-day crisis, such as a relationship breakup or getting fired from a job. And many people, and I talked about the young Olympian before, and many people think, well, how do we deal with this? Well, often when people like me give talks, they tell you about all the amazing things that they've done. Well, I'm going to tell you about my biggest failure. In 2012, I was living in the UK, and I had always wanted to do a magic trick in front of a large audience. And I thought, finally, this is my chance. So I came up with this magic trick. I did a few rehearsals for this, and all the rehearsals went really well. It came to the day of filming, and I said, I need 20 minutes backstage before I go on to set this up. And they said, that's fine, that's not a problem. Unfortunately, someone came to me at 4:30 in the afternoon and they said, "We need you on stage now." So nothing was set up correctly. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But everything that could not possibly have gone wrong also somehow managed to go wrong. I had 3,000 people in the audience yelling off, off, off. It's one of the absolute worst moments of my entire life. But it got worse than that, because Amanda Holden was absolutely horrible about my teeth, and this was going to be broadcast in front of 12 million people. So if you're going to fail big, right? Yeah, when this happened, I thought my life was ruined. I thought, any time I want to apply for a job, someone's going to Google my name and say, no way. And then any time I want to get into a relationship with someone, they're going to Google my name and say, no way. So I was running school camps in the UK at the time, and a new group came in the day after the show aired. And I was really, really hoping they had not seen the most popular show on TV. Well, they had, and they asked me what happened. Well, first of all, I went round and I asked them what their talents were, and it came to me, and I said, my talent is failing. And they all laughed at me. But then I said, no, I'm serious. Anyone can fail once. That requires no effort and no skill. But to have the talent of failing, you need to fall off the horse, get back up, and try again. Now, this was a group of teenagers. They didn't give me a lot of feedback at the time, but afterwards a couple of them came up to me and they said, "We think you're one of the most inspiring people we've ever met." And I thought, hold on. I made a turkey out of myself on national TV, and they were calling me inspiring. And to be honest, I thought they were just being nice about it. But then another group came in, they'd seen the show, I told them the story, and I got the same reaction from them. So I didn't really know why people liked this story, but since I got a good reaction from two groups, I've told more and more people this. I did a TEDx talk on this a couple of years ago. It was only when I started to meet people like that young Olympian that I started to realise that actually failure has a devastating consequence for so many people. In fact, for some people, it leads to suicide. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think the way we got into this mess is we love to give certificates of participation for everything. So we don't want anyone to fail in school. We don't want anyone to feel bad. And the problem is, in real life, if you experience a relationship breakup, you do not get a certificate of participation. Divorce proceedings may be, but not a certificate of participation. And so a lot of people have grown up in this culture where they don't know how to fail. But we can change this. I've already talked about Abraham Lincoln, that he had a business that failed and it took him 17 years to pay off the debt. If you want to do something about suicide, I dare people to share their big failures with other people. It's all very well for me telling the story of how much of an idiot I made of myself on national TV, but actually, everyone's got a story of failure. And if we share that, maybe when other people do have a bad experience, like they get fired from a job or they have a relationship breakup, if they think that, well, actually, other people overcame failure and I can too, maybe suicide won't seem like such a good option. I see that when the disaster on Britain's Got Talent happened to me, I thought my life was ruined. I can tell you today I am genuinely happy and I love what I do for a job. I give somewhere between 150 to 200 talks around the country every year, so I'm not exactly short of work. A few years ago I met the wonderful Evita. Now, yes, when I met her she did Google my name, and yes, there was some explaining to do, but we got there eventually, and I've got the ring to prove it. We just had our first child. So the point is that even if you fail spectacularly, it does not need to be the end, and you can recover from that.
That's awesome. Oh my God! Obviously, I googled it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you tempted us, didn't you, to watch it? And I watched it. And do you know the thing that actually stood out to me the most was, I mean, we've all thought about going and performing in front of a big crowd. We all have that tendency to want to be the centre of everything and be the famous person. We've all meditated upon that before, haven't we? And then to watch you and how nervous you was going out onto that stage, and I was just thinking, could I actually do that? Could I actually do that? Because most of us judge people and whatever, but we haven't got the balls to do it, to actually just walk out in front. Oh my God, I just could not even imagine. I just thought how brave it was to anyone who actually has the courage to stand to go out and do that. Is, and I think that to me was inspiring by itself, to see the nervousness and to overcome it and to actually have a go, put yourself in the position to fail, because it's just amazing.
Yeah, I remember knowing that the trick wasn't set up and standing on the edge of that stage, and I remember thinking, do I go out, do I not? And I remember thinking, this is almost certainly going to be a disaster, but I would rather know than spend the rest of my life living and wondering what could have been.
Amazing. And your courage definitely paid off, didn't it? Because it's now, as you say...
Or stupidity.
Or stupidity, one or the other. But
either
now...
I mean,
it's a strength now, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've basically built my career off this story. So, even if things do go wrong, you can recover.
I remember... my addiction was kind of like, I guess that was my life's failure, and everything attached to that was a complete disaster. And now it's the same for me. My story is building my career and my life, and that came through the vulnerability to share those things. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are totally terrified to open up about things, but it can be the making of you, can't it? Being honest about our weaknesses.
Absolutely.
And so inspiring to a lot of other people who are going through those things as well.
So thank you for doing this work of the podcast, and it's really important.
Thank you so much for coming on, Michael. I've really enjoyed this conversation. There's something that I guess I haven't actually spoke about this for a little while, but when I started Break the Chain because my best friend took his own life, and it kind of all came from there, and the amazing things that have actually come out of doing this. And I think that your message that you're sharing is amazing, and I do think that this is something that we need to tackle as a community, as human beings, where we need to actually start taking care of each other, looking out for each other, and just doing what we can, and not expecting that the government or society is going to fix this on a macro level. I think on a micro level, we have a lot of power as individuals to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, is there any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Just that suicide is preventable. One of the most important studies in suicide prevention was 500 people were stopped jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. So these were not people that had vague thoughts of suicide. These are people that had made a plan and were carrying it out. Yet when the researchers followed them up a few years later, they found that 94% were still alive or died of natural causes. So if you can help someone in that time of crisis, there's an exceptionally high chance that they will live.
And practically everybody who does it and survives regrets it immediately once they've actually done it.
Every single one, yeah. Every single person that we know that survived has said the second they let go of the rail, they knew it was a mistake. So, yeah, it is preventable and things can get better.
There are solutions to problems.
Yeah.
One way or another. And it might not be a solution to that problem, but it might be a way of dealing with that problem. Thank you so much, Michael. If you're watching online on YouTube, where we go, buy this book. Read it, because it really was an absolute pleasure. If you're listening in, type in Michael Hempseed, Being a True Hero, Understanding and Preventing Suicide in Your Community. It's well worth a read, especially if you don't know anything about this and would like to be able to do something. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure.